This happened when I was a small child, probably around 4, after I had experienced what I know now as a near-death experience, or otherwise known as an NDE. I was with my grandmother, who was very healthy, and still is very healthy for a 70-year-old woman. We went trekking across our property with a picnic basket in tow, just looking to sit down with our dog and have a nice time. Normal grandparent stuff. We ended up crossing a creek, which was dry at the time, to go back to a pasture. Nearby, probably, 50 yards away, was our cedar tree. We had sat down and started eating when our dog started going crazy. This dog, bless her soul, was an angel. It did not act like a dog most of the time. She never barked, never jumped, always acted polite. But she was going nuts, running in circles around us, growling and barking. My grandmother grew concerned, so she put our picnic stuff back in the basket and tried to calm her down. I was sitting a few feet away, scared because my dog was growling and going crazy. I will admit my memory gets fuzzy around here, but I remember seeing a large gray creature step out of the creek tree line we had previously walked through. My grandma scooped me up and booked it out of there. Our dog went running with us. I am 90% sure she ran to the cedar tree. She always talks about it being her favorite tree and about how protective it is. The tree was a lot closer than her house. That was roughly half a mile away at this point. I just know our dog calmed down and I was happier. No, I don't live in the Southwest. I live in the South Central East Arkansas, closer to Louisiana, so I have no idea what it could have been. The other night, my mom and I were camping in Red River Gorge, Kentucky. We are regulars down there and spend countless hours on the trails and campsites. We decided to try and find a new spot. We ended up all the way down Indian Creek on 9 a.m. almost at the end of the road. We found a beautiful campsite and were so excited to spend the night there. The first strange thing to happen was that I could not start a fire. I can't tell you how many times I made a fire before. I've never struggled like this. I went through 8 campfire matches. They are much larger and hold a fire for 15 minutes. Almost an entire box of regular matches, and we had a fire starter block just to make things easier. And of course dry wood. It took me hours to get it going. I blamed the moisture in the air that night, but things continued to get weird. Next, it's 2:18 a.m. and my mom wakes me up to say there was someone outside our tent, and they have been there for roughly 5 minutes. I awake and see lights shining down into our tent. You could hear a woman's voice, but we are both paralyzed with fear. We don't look out. We're down a steep hill and the lights were coming up from the street, which is only about 300 feet away. The lights did not go away for another 5 minutes at this point, and finally the lights and voices were gone, but we have never heard a car leave. We were on a gravel road in the middle of the night, and the nearest campsite is probably 10 walking minutes away. We would have heard a car. Finally, we fell back asleep after being spooked. 4:19 and we wake up again to my mom's phone playing music. It sounds like a sad funeral song, but it also sounds like it could have been a ringtone on her phone. Neither of us have heard this song before, and neither of us have set alarms at all. We do not have service, so her phone is on airplane mode. When she picks up the phone, the music just quits playing. She doesn't press any buttons and her screen is still black. The song just turns off. She didn't receive any notifications from any apps, it's just a blank screen, and her music app isn't even playing. The next morning, I go through her phone and listen to all the different songs, and that song is not anywhere on her phone. So why did this random song start and end up playing on her phone? Plus, when I woke her up, she was telling me about her crazy dream of someone coming up to her tent and asking to come inside. The first dream, a woman comes up and asks to come inside. My mom then tries to grab something for self-defense, and the tent is so large she can't get to it. The next dream, a man asks to come into our tent for just a minute, and he says he will leave soon. But when she grabs something for defense, it crumbles in her hand. The guy runs away after he sees people chasing after him. She then wakes up to the weird funeral song playing on her phone. My mom didn't know if those dreams were real or not when she woke up. She never remembers her dreams. That night was just full of weird occurrences. If they happened by themselves, I wouldn't think anything of it. But there was just so much that happened in that 12-hour time span. It truly felt like we were not wanted there, and I have never felt that at the gorge. It seemed like any other day. However, my driver's license was going to expire in about a week, so I dreaded the thought of going to the DMV. But I had an idea. Everyone always goes on the weekends or on a Monday. What if I played the system and tried the middle of the week to get around it all? I got stressed out in public areas, around lots of strangers, could not find any friends who would be willing to go with me. I resigned myself to go alone after some lunchtime. Parking my car, I noticed that there were only 3 other cars there. Perfect. No line to deal with. I also noticed that this is not exactly a public place. It's sort of near some woods. Nothing out in the wilderness, but near the outskirts of town. Stepping inside, I see that there are a few people here, and only one worker in today. My plan had not accounted for this. As you would expect, things went very slowly. Soon it was just one person in front of me. I am counting the tiles on the roof again when I hear the door open. I did not think to look that way, but suddenly the smell hits me. It's like old milk or spoiled food. Coughing, I turn and see 2 strange people walk in. One had slightly greasy hair, but that was as dirty as they looked. They seemed sort of spaced out. Not all there, and were dressed in common enough clothes. Now I know the running joke about smelly people in a DMV, so that is just how I tossed it off. However, when they moved behind me in line, it was pretty bad. The office did not smell great to begin with, but it was awful now. As if time was going slow enough without something else to make me more conscientious of being there. These 2 guys had weird behavior, like they were drunk or on drugs or high or something. So again, I figured just the usual at the DMV. But when they talked to each other, they had holes in what they were saying. Like, for example, if one of them noticed a poster, they would look at it and say, "Do you?" gesture at a poster there. But they did not have accents, so clearly it was not a language barrier. And if it was, why use the language you don't know? I am really creeped out now, as the person is posing for the camera in front of me, praying they hurry and get out so I can finish. I could not help but keep peeking at them when I thought they were not looking. I mess up and the bald one is looking in my direction when I look over at him. Of course, I avert my gaze like I was looking to the door or something. Every so often I am looking back and he is still staring right at me, and is doing this weird face, like he was smiling, but forgot to lift the edges into a smile, so he was not baring his teeth. It was not comforting, to say the least. The more I notice him staring at me, the more I feel his gaze. I hear one of them say, "Who is there?" Odd thing to say. I look back and see both of them staring at me fixedly. I am at the front of the line now, but with 2 creepy people looking at me as I am trying to take care of the paperwork, and had almost gotten used to the smell by now. The lady at the front is giving me a weird look as I am super nervous and sweating. Asks me if I'm okay. What can I say? 2 people who smell like death are staring at me in line. I go and get to the booth and take a picture, and they are making creepy, chittering noises that sounds like something like laughing as they keep staring at me. The picture has me sort of looking off to the side at them, and she informs me I must be facing the camera, and I is looking at it to confirm my eye color. It is not a good picture, but I grab it, pay, and am busting through the door to get to my car. As I am leaving, I notice the bald one staring at me. I get out there as fast as I can and drown every fear I can into some heavy gaming and comfort food all night long, until I'm so tired I pass out. So, in the Philippines, there are two bits of modern folklore that resonate with descriptions of skinwalkers in the United States. Wolf bird-like creatures who travel by night, and bulletproof people said to live in the mountains. I lived in Cebu for a couple of years with cousins in a relatively large northern city on some farmland owned by my late grandfather, and I heard these stories from my aunt and uncle on either side of the family. Someday during the first week I was there, karaoke had finished playing by around 2 a.m. and I was lying in bed. I had a little shack surrounded by brush and large trees, with most neighbors being relatives, and things were fairly quiet when I was made aware of something large moving in the grass outside. I thought at first that it was a person, and started getting anxious when it moved so close to my window. But it stopped momentarily, maybe even 15 feet from me, and I could hear heavy breathing like a lion. Then it let out a long and loud howl, exactly like a wild wolf, and continued walking through the property. I was basically paralyzed and tried to ignore it at the time, but it immediately made no sense to me. What the hell is a wolf doing on an island with no wolves? Why did this thing sound like it was 6 feet tall? And if there was a giant animal casually walking around, why was it so close to the busiest road in the city and the most populated city for miles? I just couldn't wrap my head around the whole experience. That was 4 years ago, and I only now discovered skinwalker tales here in the US. And while the videos I've watched don't reproduce the sound I heard, some details are very similar, namely that they only appear at night, are bulletproof shapeshifters, and have a wolf-like appearance. The videos here sound more like coyotes howling, but the breathing is almost eerily similar. I don't know what to make of my experience. I often think YouTube videos are faked for monetization, but in this case, I'll hop on the hype train. This is some scary shit. This story recollects what happened during the Navajo Nation Fair season of 2015. My roommate and her boyfriend decided to head back to the reservation to take part in the festivities, rodeo, parade, and carnival. My roommate was the offspring of divorced parents and spent her teenage years half on the reservation in Window Rock, Arizona, with her mother, and half her father in Phoenix. She was raised as a devout Catholic, even attending Catholic school. Nothing paranormal had ever occurred to her in her lifetime up until this point. Her boyfriend was an urban Navajo who was a Christian, having been born and raised off the reserve in Phoenix, Arizona. I am declaring their religious ideologies and affiliations because neither of them believed in Navajo traditionalism or ghost stories. Late one evening, after both of them got off work, they decided to head out to make most of the 3-day fair weekend. My roommate had made prior accommodations with a good friend from high school. When my roommate was a young adult, her mother decided to move away from the reservation. If her mother still lived in Window Rock, she would have simply stayed there. The accommodations were as follows. Her good friend opted to stay at a close relative's and offered her 2-bedroom, 2-bath manufactured home at their disposal. The trailer was located off the road between St. Michael's and the first 4-way intersection. Many have called it the Black Road to St. Michael's. The old original township of St. Michael's, that is. As you can imagine, they arrived to their Navajo Fair B&B pretty late. The trailer was off to the right of the main highway and was situated at the foot of a large rolling hill. There were no streetlights. First order of business, my roommate calls her friend to let her know they arrived safely. They walk up to the trailer and unlock the door and give themselves a tour of their accommodations. They also turn on all the lights in every room as they toured. My roommate had driven the entirety of the journey, so she was a bit more fatigued than her partner. She asked him to go get the luggage from the car. It was a hatchback, so the car was parked about 40 feet away. She explained to me that it had rained some weeks before and the dirt road leading up to the house was wrecked. To avoid bottoming out, she parked on level ground. She walks into the guest room and her boyfriend is already laid out on the bed. She pleads with him to go get the luggage, and most importantly, her makeup bag, so she can remove her makeup before bed. She compromises with him that she'll go out with him if he does the heavy lifting. She doesn't want to put her heels back on, so she decides to watch him from the porch. Yes, heels. She worked at a bank and had to always dress professionally in a pantsuit and heels. So, she is standing on the top stair of the small 3-stair porch with the front door slightly ajar. Her hand on the doorknob. Her boyfriend walks off into the pitch black. The light from his phone serves as the only beacon of light signaling his location. As she watches his light grow dimmer and smaller in the distance, she hears what seems to be a pack of dogs howling and barking. She said it sounded like a rumble, a pack of feral reservation dogs or coyotes fighting. The pack of dogs comes barreling down the large hill behind the trailer, and she hears a loud thud against the back wall of the trailer. The thud was so loud, she heard the rattling of the picture frames that were hanging. At this point, fear begins to creep into her mind. She calls out her boyfriend and hears no response. She shouts for him once again, and that's when she realizes the dogs have all gone silent. All at once, in a fluid succession of motions, she said that something from inside the trailer slams the front door, so fast that it creates a gust of wind. She said that if she hadn't been holding onto the doorknob, it would have knocked her off, landing her on the front steps. The front porch light flickers and goes dead. She is standing there, barefoot in the darkness. She tries to open the door and retreat back into the trailer. She was able to turn the doorknob until it clicked. The door wasn't locked. Something heavy was pressed up against the flimsy, manufactured hollow core door from the inside. At this point, she said she didn't realize she was crying at the brink of an anxiety attack. Adrenaline took over and she began throwing herself and all of her weight against the door. She said once she saw it inch open and the light from inside flooded the doorway for a split second before it slammed shut in retaliation. Fight or flight. She decides to run barefoot into the darkness to find her boyfriend. His account. He leaves his girlfriend at the top of the front door steps as he walks off into the dark with only his phone serving as a flashlight. He is being very careful where he steps because the earth is turned up and twisted and gnarled, deep ruts and grooves from a vehicle driving in the mud before it hardens into a crust. He is afraid he might twist his ankle. He too hears the frenzied howls and barks of the dogs. He turns around to look at where the sounds are coming from. In the distance, he sees the faint light of the porch go off. He rationalizes to himself that the dog's barking frightened his girlfriend, and in fear she ran inside and unintentionally turned the porch light off. He continues walking in the direction of the car. He hears the thud of heavy footsteps behind him, mimicking his own stride. Not exactly in tune with his, following a split second after his own thud, almost echoing his own intentionally. Figuring it might just be his frightened girlfriend running out to find him, he calls out to her, but to no avail. He sees a dim flicker in the distance, the light from his phone bouncing off the reflectors of the taillights of the car. His body floods with relief. The relief quickly drains to despair. His phone erratically dies. His heartbeat almost beats out of his chest. How could this be? He wasn't on his phone the entire drive back. It was fully charged. He takes a few urgent paces toward where the car was before the lights turned off. His palms are sweaty, and he swears he could feel his heartbeat pounding in his hands. He desperately reaches into his pockets for the car keys. He begins frantically pressing all the buttons, the lock, the unlock, panic, and open hatchback buttons. Nothing. He even stretches out his hand in the dark as he presses the buttons, thinking he is on the cusp of the electronic radius of the vehicle to respond. Still nothing. The footsteps behind him hastened and almost sound like he is going to be charged from the back. He is too terrified to look back. At this point, he realizes the dread he feels in the pit of his stomach means it's something unnatural, paranormal, something that shouldn't be there. His shoulders drop as if he instinctually braces for some sort of impact. The sound of heavy footsteps would indicate that he should have been hit by now. Nothing. The footsteps loudly lead directly up to him, to his heels, and nothing. He opens his eyes and he hears something like a coin drop and hit the top of the car. He turns around to the patter of bare feet on the dirt road. His girlfriend charges into a full embrace, hugging him and burying her face into his chest. Mind you, his feet stay planted. He doesn't take one step forward or back. The car keys are still in his hand and his thumb presses down. A loud click, the familiar sound of the hatchback automatically opening, and the light from inside the car quickly floods their immediate surroundings. They grab their luggage and a pair of flip-flops from the car and slowly make their way back to the trailer. Oddly, the front porch light is now on. My roommate makes her boyfriend go inside and check all the rooms now before she goes back in. He opens the door with ease and he checks each room meticulously. There is no one inside, and all the windows are still locked from the inside. I have never retold this account to anyone, but thought I would finally share before time and life erases all details from my memory. Once in the safety of the trailer, her boyfriend pulled out his cell phone, and it turned on the same battery percentage. They corroborate their experiences to recount what happened to each other. Both of them are dumbfounded at the fact that both of them were shouting at the top of their lungs for the other at the time or another, but neither of them said they heard the others yelling. Growing up in the res, you hear your fair share of skinwalker and ghost stories, but this is the first time I heard one where the perpetrator manipulated electronics to a great extent or even at all. It was also the first case where the perpetrator manipulated sound waves. Both of them swore that they were easily in earshot of each other, but weren't allowed to hear the other's cries. There were no structures or trees between them obstructing the sound waves. He had heard the pack of dogs but wasn't allowed to hear her screaming out for him. What also spurred me to share this was the massive amount of questioning. If they exist, why haven't they been filmed or caught on camera? Skinwalkers are just as modern as you and me. Wicked as they may be, they are not stupid and deal with smartphones and technological advances as much as anyone. They walk the world as normal people during the day, but by nighttime, they become something much more sinister. This is an experience my mom and dad that happened in December of 2018. They were coming back home from eating out and pulled into their driveway and parked. The area where they live is moderately wooded and on a large plot of land, about 20 acres or so. They got out of their car and started to walk up to the door when they heard a blood-curdling scream coming from only 10 feet away. Not only was the scream terrifying, but it was extremely loud. My dad is a state trooper and served in the U.S. Marine Corps, so not much will actually scare him. He's the guy to watch a horror movie at 3 a.m. with all the lights off and the curtains wide open. However, that night he said he was genuinely terrified. They snapped out of their trance and ran inside, and he came back out with his gun and got in his patrol car and started checking out the area. He shined his spotlight down into the pasture and around the property, but couldn't find a thing. The fact that he did this is alarming because he would never pull a gun out if he was joking, which he has done multiple times. I've only seen him actually pull a gun out 2 other times in my life, and this isn't the only experience. Only about a week after I came back home from college for winter break, I sat on the front porch late one night drinking coffee and reading a book when I heard something eerie coming from the pasture to the east of my house. It sounded like creaking, but there was no wind blowing. And I know the area clearly, and there wasn't a hanging branch or anything for that matter that would justify that particular sound. Even though it creeped me out, I refused to think of anything of it and brushed it off as just strange and unexplainable. Thoroughly chilled, I stopped reading my book because of bad lighting and went inside. After a while, I found I forgot my book outside and went out to grab it again. This time, though, I heard a low, poor howl. The only canine creatures that lives around their place are coyotes, and when you hear them, it's a mixture of yips and short, pitchy howls. Hearing it and having my fears proved that it was some otherworldly being, I grabbed my book and ran inside. About 20 minutes later, my brother comes home from a friend's house. He walks in and doesn't say anything other than, "Hey." I tell him that I experienced, because we all have experiences that we tell each other to creep each other out. To my surprise, he said he heard the same thing just a couple of minutes earlier when he was walking outside. The sound had moved from its previous location, southwest of my position, and was now in the northwest corner of the property. He said that the sound was a long, deep, but poor or weak, kind of like the one I heard. My brother seemed more spooked with his encounter than I did with mine, and he said that the duration was just so long, and then sounded very fake, like a poor imitation. After that, there wasn't any more sightings the entire time I was home. It's since been ruled out as a deer since we have a lot of them, and they make some sort of strange noises sometimes. But after reading through encounters, I feel like it may be a skinwalker issue or something of the sort. We do live near a spot where the Native Americans hold their powwows, and there is a house in our neighborhood that is built on an Indian burial ground. Allegedly, so it wouldn't be a surprise that this might be the case. I have other experiences with some strange sounds and being whistled at in the dark of night, but no sightings thus far. I have an interesting story I'd like to share with you. One that I feel is rather unique compared to most, and I'd like to hopefully get some answers if at all possible. So, my story starts when I was about 11 years old, 2002 in Southern California. My mother had found a new boyfriend who lived up in the mountains. You see, I've lived in the city most of my life and was excited to hear that he lived particularly in the middle of nowhere. Weird, I know, but as it turns out, I was born with autism and never really liked all the loud noises that come from the city. Plus, he had 2 ponies on the property. I was always closer to animals than people, so the idea of meeting a new animal was enough for me to go along with the visit. A few months passed, and every so often my mother and I would visit his home. As I got familiar with the place and the animals, they would sometimes leave me alone for an hour or so to go out on a date. Maybe that would seem insane nowadays, but I was perfectly fine with being alone. My mother, however, had one rule for me: never to leave the property, and if someone came by I didn't know, then to get inside and wait until we came home. This is where the story really starts. My mother had left her with her boyfriend almost half an hour ago, and I was bored with staying inside, so I decided to go outside to spending time with the ponies. There were 2 of them. One was named Cinnamon and the other Colt. Not very original, I know, but that's what they were called. Usually, when I came over, the 2 of them would wait by the fence until I came over to play with them. But today I noticed that Cinnamon wasn't there. I just chalked it up to her probably being in the stable, and instead went over to Colt and pet him for a few minutes. That's when things got weird. I heard a whining of sorts coming from the forest. I looked over to the forest edge, as you could easily see from the house to the forest without getting in the way, and what I saw standing there was what looked like Cinnamon. She stood there almost motionless, as she looked directly at me. Colt seemed to notice what I was looking at, and as soon he turned to look, he started snorting and pawing at the ground. I had never seen him behave like this before. I looked up to the forest and noticed Cinnamon was walking in. I was worried that she had gotten out and would get lost, so my childlike mind thought the only thing I could do was to give chase and to try to get her back. I ran into the forest looking for her, but it oddly seemed as if she was just out of reach whenever I spotted her. This is where the encounter got odd, and what I'd really like to have closure on. Soon I couldn't see Cinnamon anywhere. She was gone. No longer any trace of her. I looked around and realized I was lost in the woods and had no way of finding my way home. That's when I heard it. It sounded like 2 dogs mauling one another. I was terrified at this point, as the sounds were really close to me and there were even screams mixed into it. I'll be honest, those screams still haunt me to this day. As I stood there, stuck in terror, I noticed something in the corner of my eye peek around from a tree. I shakily looked over and saw what looked like a deer staring at me. However, I couldn't see the back end of its body, as if it stood on 2 legs and was hiding behind the tree. At this point, I was afraid and confused by what was happening. The deer was looking at me like Cinnamon did, but then its mouth fell open slack, and I heard it whisper something to me. "Are you lost?" Its mouth didn't move as it spoke. It just stayed open slack. Even though I was terrified out of my mind, I nodded. I hadn't moved an inch and it spoke again. "Follow me." It moved behind the tree, hiding itself, but then I noticed it peer from behind a different tree that was further down the path. I vividly remember that I had no idea where or who I was going with, and this creature, but I had no choice but to follow it. Every time I got closer to it, it would hide and appear again behind another tree moments later, and never once did I see it walk from one tree to another. It felt like hours had gone by. Even as the light in the forest quickly faded, I was still led by this creature through the forest. Finally, the creature peered around one last time. Its mouth fell open like it did once before, and it spoke one last time. "Go home." I could see that where it hid, just behind it, was my home. The flashing of blue and red lights could be seen coming from the front of the house. As I walked towards the edge of the forest, I stopped and looked at the tree where the creature had hid. I had no idea if it was even there anymore, but I felt compelled to thank it for helping me. I didn't get a response, and I didn't even hear anything move from within the forest. When I got home, my mother was crying, and the police were there. Needless to say, I was punished for leaving the house, and later that month, my mother broke up with her boyfriend. Not because of the incident. I never did get to return to the house, nor did I have another encounter such as this one. To this day, I have no idea what happened, but I get the feeling that whatever that dear creature was, it saved me from the thing that was impersonating Cinnamon. I live close to the reservation, just outside Mesa, Arizona. I have a couple of native friends who I just recently went camping with around 20 miles outside the valley to a place they call Three Poles. This place is considered holy land in their eyes and is close to a river. There are numerous stories I know about this place, such as the flute player you can hear at night, or the boulder-sized splashes you hear in the river. But the most notable are the stories of skinwalkers. We arrived at the camping site around 9 p.m. It was already dark at this point, so we started to unpack and made a fire. Once that was done, my buddies put up the barriers and puffed the smoke of tobacco upon us as a personal barrier. They told me never to go anywhere alone, and that around 3 a.m. is when the spirits are the most active. At around 2 a.m., the beating of a drum became very clear. This is a sign of the skinwalker, they told me. At around 3 a.m., the smell of wet dog became apparent. This is the sign of either two things: Hoofy, an extremely evil spirit, or the skinwalkers. The fire grew small and we could see the shadows of animals. We all decided to move to another site in the morning. As first light dawned, we packed. I sat in the back of his truck to hold down the stuff. As we left, I saw a Rottweiler walking on its hind legs straight to the middle of our camp. It was easily 5 feet tall and had bright orange eyes. I freaked out and screamed as it was running at us, still standing up. It disappeared into a bush after we turned the corner. Later on at our other camp, an old man with his face covered up by hair visited us and acted very strangely. We ran out of drinks, so a friend and I decided to head out on foot. We saw a car, and as it approached, it slowed down to halt, and the same man asked us if we wanted a ride. We said no because by this time, my friends had told me the man was a skinwalker. He grabbed my arm and pulled me by his car and looked straight at me. As my friend ran up to grab me, the man took off in his car. Once we got back, I relaxed. It was around dawn when just behind me, the man appeared about 10 feet away and asked if I could help him with something back at his camp. As he did, 2 trucks came around the corner ahead to further into the grounds. He watched them as they passed, and then all of a sudden he bolted after them. I was astonished seeing this 60-year-old man chasing down a car. My native friends put up a salt barrier. I heard sounds all night, but never saw anything after that.